Maria was the kind of woman the world tends to overlook, not because there was anything wrong with her, but because she was too busy surviving to make any noise about it. She lived in a small house on a street where the gutters needed fixing, and the neighbors waved but never really talked. A two-bedroom place she had turned into a home through sheer stubbornness and a lot of late nights. She raised her two kids, 9-year-old twins, on a nurse's salary that looked decent on paper until you subtracted the rent, the groceries, the school shoes that always seemed to wear out faster than they should, and the little things nobody budgets for until they hit you sideways on a Tuesday. She worked double shifts at the regional hospital, not because anyone was making her do it, but because the alternative was the kind of falling behind that is very easy to start and very hard to stop. And Maria had made a quiet decision years ago that she was not going to let that happen to her children. She had made that decision alone, in a hospital room, holding two newborns and no hand to hold back, and she had kept that promise to herself every single day since. By the time this story begins, she had been keeping that promise for 9 years, and it had cost her sleep, social life, and more tears than she would ever admit to anyone. But her kids were fed, her lights were on, and every night when she tucked them in, she felt something that was not quite happiness but was close enough to keep her going. That was her life, honest, hard, and invisible to most of the world, and she had made her peace with it. On a cold Thursday evening in late November, Maria finished a 12-hour shift, changed out of her work clothes in the hospital locker room, and stopped at a gas station on her way home because the tank was running low and she had learned the hard way not to ignore warning lights. She was tired in the specific way that nurses get tired, which is different from regular tired. It sits in your feet first, then your lower back, then somewhere behind your eyes, and all she was thinking about was whether she had enough eggs at home to make the twins breakfast in the morning. She pulled in, got out of her car, and started pumping gas, and that is when she saw him. He was an older man, heavy-set, well-dressed in the way that suggests someone who doesn't have to think about what they wear, and he was slumped against the side of a large black vehicle in the far corner of the parking lot. 2 other people had walked past him already. One had glanced over and kept moving. Most people, when they see something like that, talk themselves out of what they're seeing. He's tired, he's waiting for someone, it's none of my business. Someone else will handle it. Maria did not do that. The moment she looked at him, something in her training clicked on like a light switch, and she was moving before she had fully decided to move. She crossed the parking lot, crouched down beside him, and knew within seconds that this was not a man who had too much to drink or a man who needed a glass of water. He had no pulse. His chest was not moving. His face had gone the kind of gray that you only learn to recognize when you've been in healthcare long enough, and Maria had been in healthcare long enough. She called out to the cashier inside to call 911, positioned her hands, and began compressions right there on the cold asphalt in the harsh white light of the gas station awning. With the sound of traffic going by on the road and no one else stopping to help, she worked on him for 11 minutes. Her arms burned. Her knees hurt from the hard ground. She did not stop. When the ambulance finally pulled in and the paramedics took over, she stepped back, caught her breath, and watched them load him into the vehicle. She did not know his name. She did not ask for one. Nobody came to thank her, and she did not wait around to see if they would. She picked up her bag from where she had dropped it on the ground, walked back to her car, and drove home. She made dinner, helped with homework, turned off the lights, and went to bed. She had no idea that the man she had just pulled back from the edge of death was about to change her entire life. And she had no idea that by the next morning, the world outside her front door would never look the same again. The man Maria had saved did not wake up on a park bench or in the back of a stranger's car. He woke up in the intensive care unit of the very same hospital where Maria worked, which was something nobody knew yet and which would matter later. His name was Harlan, and he was 71 years old, and he was not the kind of man people usually saw slumped against a car in a gas station parking lot. He was a retired United States Army general who had spent the better part of 3 decades making decisions that affected thousands of lives. And after he left the military, he had moved quietly into the world of private business, the kind of business that doesn't advertise itself. Infrastructure contracts, development projects, investment firms, board seats on organizations most people have never heard of, but whose decisions shape the roads they drive on and the hospitals they walk into. He was not a celebrity. He was not the kind of powerful that puts your face on a magazine cover. He was the kind of powerful that gets things done with a phone call, the kind that has been earned slowly over 50 years of showing up and following through, and the kind that comes with a deep network of people who are loyal not because they have to be, but because he had always treated them like they mattered. He had a family, 4 grown children, grandchildren he saw on holidays, a daughter-in-law named Rita who managed his schedule and his affairs with the kind of calm efficiency that made her irreplaceable. And by the time any of them reached the hospital that Thursday night, he was already in surgery, and none of them knew exactly what had happened or how close they had come to losing him entirely. The doctors explained it plainly. He had gone into full cardiac arrest in a public parking lot, and if someone had not started CPR within the first few minutes, there would have been nothing left to save by the time the ambulance arrived. The response time, the paramedics said, had been good. But the real reason Harlan was alive was whoever had worked on him before they got there. Rita asked who that was. The paramedics said they didn't know. They had arrived to find an older man receiving CPR from a woman in scrubs who stepped back the moment they pulled in, answered their questions quickly and clearly, and then walked away before anyone thought to ask her name. Nobody had her information. Nobody had stopped her. She was just gone. Rita found the security footage from the gas station herself. That same night, after making one call to the right person, the footage was grainy and shot from an odd angle, but it showed enough. A woman, medium height, dark hair pulled back, wearing scrubs, dropping a bag and crossing the parking lot without hesitating, kneeling down and doing what needed to be done. You could not see her face clearly. You could see everything about how she moved. Rita showed the footage to Harlan's eldest son, David, who watched it twice without saying anything, and then a third time. And then he set his jaw in the way he did when he had already made a decision and just hadn't said it out loud yet. He told Rita to find her. Not to send someone to find her himself, starting immediately. David was thorough by nature and had access to resources that made thorough people very effective, and it took his team less than 18 hours to put a name, an address, and a basic life picture together. Her name was Maria. She was 38 years old. She was a licensed practical nurse. She was a single mother of twins. She drove a car that was 15 years old. She rented her home. She worked double shifts regularly. Her savings account had a balance in it that David, who moved millions of dollars around without blinking, had to read twice because he initially assumed it was missing a digit. He printed the report and brought it to his father's hospital room the next morning, where Harlan was propped up in bed with 2 cracked ribs from the compressions and a heart that was beating because a stranger had refused to walk past him. Harlan read the whole thing slowly and carefully, the way he read everything. And when he finished, he put it down on the blanket over his lap and looked out the window for a long time without speaking. David waited. He had learned over 50 years of being this man's son that the silence was always worth waiting through. Finally, Harlan turned back and said, quietly and without any drama, that he wanted David to find out everything Maria needed, not some of it, all of it. And he said one more thing, which was that whatever they did for her, they were not going to do it in a way that made her feel like she was being paid off, because what she had done was not the kind of thing you put a price on, and the way they responded to it needed to reflect that. David nodded, folded the report, and walked out of the room already dialing. Maria's Friday morning started the same way most of her Fridays did, her alarm going off before the sun came up, the twins arguing in the kitchen about something that didn't matter, the smell of toast, the low hum of the morning news on the television she kept on more for background noise than actual information. She had already pushed the night before to the back of her mind, the way she pushed most things that didn't require immediate attention, because she had learned a long time ago that you cannot carry everything at once and still function. And she had a shift to get ready for, and 2 children to get out the door before she could think about anything else. She was standing at the kitchen counter pouring coffee when her neighbor knocked. Not her usual knock, which was casual and patient, but something faster and a little uncertain, the kind of knock that makes you set your cup down before you open the door. Maria opened it, and her neighbor was standing there in a housecoat with her reading glasses still on her head, pointing toward the street with an expression that Maria could not immediately read. She said there were cars outside, a lot of them. Maria looked past her and felt her stomach do something strange. The street in front of her house, which was usually quiet at that hour with maybe 1 or 2 vehicles parked along the curb, was lined on both sides as far as she could see. Black sedans, dark trucks, A few vehicles with out-of-state plates, all of them still and quiet in the early morning light, like they had been placed there carefully and deliberately. She counted without meaning to and stopped when she got past 30 because the number didn't seem real. She told her neighbor she didn't know what was happening, and her neighbor said she didn't think so either. And they both stood there for a moment in the kind of shared confusion that doesn't have much to say for itself. Maria went inside, told the twins to stay in the kitchen, and walked to her front door. And when she opened it and stepped onto her porch, she understood. Not all of it, not immediately, but enough to feel the air change around her. There were people standing on and around her front lawn. Not a crowd in the chaotic sense, not loud or pushy or demanding, but people. More than 100 of them, arranged in a way that was quiet and deliberate. Men and women in suits and dress coats. A few in what looked like military uniforms, some of them older, some middle-aged, all of them still. Nobody was on their phone. Nobody was talking loudly. They were just standing there in the cold morning air, looking at her porch, and the moment she appeared in the doorway, every single one of them bowed. Not a quick nod, not a polite tilt of the head, but a real bow, slow and low and held for a moment, the kind that you cannot fake and that takes something genuine to produce. Maria stood very still on her porch and felt something she could not name move through her chest. She genuinely thought for a moment that there had been some kind of mistake, that they had the wrong address, that this was meant for someone else entirely, someone who had done something worth this kind of attention. Then the crowd parted slightly at the front, and a man stepped forward. David, though she did not know his name yet, tall, composed, holding his hat in both hands in front of him, and he walked up to the edge of her porch steps and looked up at her and said that she had saved his father's life, and that every single person standing in her yard was there because they loved that man and did not know what else to do with the size of what they were feeling. He said they were not there to make a scene or to embarrass her. They were there because some things are too big to send in a card. Maria opened her mouth and then closed it again because she did not have anything ready to say to that. And then, from somewhere behind her legs, one of the twins, her daughter, the one who had never once in 9 years learned to read a room, pushed the door open wider, looked out at the crowd filling the yard, turned to Maria with completely wide and serious eyes, and asked in a voice loud enough for the first 3 rows to hear exactly why there were so many people standing in their grass. And the crowd, all 127 of them, generals and executives and old soldiers and city officials, broke into laughter at exactly the same moment, the warm and helpless kind, and several of them had tears running down their faces while they did it, and Maria looked down at her daughter and felt something unlock in her chest that she had not realized was locked, and she laughed too. The days that followed were unlike anything Maria had ever experienced, and not always in the way she expected. She had assumed, in the back of her mind, that whatever came next would involve a conversation about money, a check, a fund, some formal gesture wrapped in a nice envelope, and she had already decided quietly and firmly how she was going to handle that. She was not going to take it, not because she was too proud to need help, because she was not too proud, and she absolutely needed it, but because the moment she accepted payment for what she had done in that parking lot, it would become a transaction, and she could not stand the idea of that. What had happened between her and that stranger on the cold asphalt was not a transaction. It was just a human being seeing another human being and responding the only way that felt possible in that moment, and she did not want anyone putting a number on it, not even a generous one. So when David came to her kitchen table 2 days after the gathering on her lawn, just him, no entourage, no briefcase full of paperwork, just a man sitting across from her with a cup of coffee she had made him, and the conversation turned to what his father wanted to do for her. Maria was ready. He mentioned a house. She shook her head before he finished the sentence. He mentioned a lump sum. She put her hand flat on the table in a way that didn't need explaining. He mentioned a car, and she hesitated for just a second. The 2009 Hyundai had been making a sound for 3 weeks that she had been actively pretending not to hear. But then she shook her head at that too. David did not push. He had been told by his father not to push, and he was the kind of man who followed that kind of instruction because he understood the reasoning behind it. He told her he respected everything she was saying, and that his father had expected she might feel exactly this way, and that the reason he was sitting at her table was not to hand her something, but to listen to what her life actually looked like if she was willing to share it. That shifted something in the room. Maria, who was usually very careful about how much of herself she showed to people she didn't know, found herself talking, not performing, not carefully selecting what was safe to say, but actually talking about the nursing certification she had been trying to finish for 3 years, about the bridge program that would move her from her current position to a registered nurse but cost more than she could pull together, and required clinical hours she couldn't schedule around 2 kids in back-to-back shifts, about the way she had submitted a scheduling accommodation request to the hospital administration twice and been quietly moved to the bottom of a pile both times. She talked about her son and the way music had opened something up in him that nothing else had. How he had been practicing on a second-hand keyboard with 3 broken keys because the school had cut the music program the previous year and she hadn't found the way to replace what that meant to him outside of school. She was not asking for anything when she said these things. She was just answering an honest question honestly, the way she had been raised to do. David listened the entire time without interrupting, which she noticed and appreciated, and when she finished he thanked her, finished his coffee, and left. He did not tell her what, if anything, would happen next. Harlan, back home now and recovering in his chair with a phone that never stopped ringing, had listened to everything David reported back and then made 3 phone calls. Just 3. That was the part Maria would think about later. Not the outcome, but the economy of it. The way a life built on real relationships and genuine trust could move something that would have taken her years to move on her own, and it took him 3 calls and an afternoon. Within the week, the hospital administration reviewed her file and approved the scheduling accommodation she had been requesting for 2 years without explanation or apology. Just a brief letter saying the decision had been reconsidered. A regional scholarship fund that Maria had never heard of contacted her nursing program to confirm she had been selected for full financial support through completion, structured specifically for working parents in bridge certification programs. And then one afternoon her son came running home from school so fast he forgot to close the gate behind him, burst through the front door red-faced and breathless and crying in the way children cry when something is almost too good to process, and told Maria that the music program was back, that a teacher had come in that day and announced it was fully funded and returning immediately, and that he was going to be able to play again. Maria did not find out until much later that the funding was permanent, quietly endowed for the next 10 years by a donor who had asked not to be named. She walked out to the porch that evening when the kids were settled, sat down in the chair she always sat in, looked out at the ordinary street with its ordinary gutters and ordinary quiet, and let herself cry, not from sadness, not from relief exactly, but from the specific feeling of being seen by the world after a very long time of being invisible to it. 6 months passed the way months do when you are busy living inside them, quickly and slowly, at the same time, full of small moments that don't announce themselves as important until you look back and realize they were. Maria finished her RN Bridge program on a Thursday morning in late spring, in a community college auditorium that smelled like old carpet and fresh flowers someone had brought in for the occasion, and she graduated first in her cohort, which did not surprise anyone who had worked alongside her, but which surprised her completely, because she had spent so much of the last 6 months simply trying to get through each week that she had not stopped to notice how well she was actually doing. She had walked into that auditorium expecting to feel relieved, and she did feel relieved, but she also felt something bigger underneath it, something that took her a moment to identify. It was pride, quiet and solid, the kind that doesn't need an audience, the kind you feel in your chest when you know that what you earned was really earned, and that nobody handed it to you. She was scanning the rows of seats for her twins, who had made a handmade sign that she had specifically asked them not to bring and that they had absolutely brought anyway, when she noticed a man in the back row sitting in a folding chair that one of the staff had clearly brought in specially because the auditorium was full. He was older, heavyset, moving a little carefully in the way people move when their body is still reminding them of something it went through. And he was wearing a suit that was too nice for a Thursday morning community college graduation. And when Maria's name was called and she walked across that stage, he was the first person in the entire room on his feet. She did not cry on stage. She saved that for the parking lot afterward, briefly and privately, with her daughter patting her arm in the solemn way children do when they are trying very hard to be mature about something. The story got out the way true stories eventually do, not with a press release, not with anyone's permission, but through a person who simply could not stop thinking about it. The The paramedic who had responded to the gas station call that Thursday night had been doing his job for 11 years, and in 11 years he had seen a lot, and most of it he was able to leave at work when his shift ended, but this one he kept carrying home. He kept thinking about the footage his colleague had described, a woman in scrubs, alone, working on a stranger in a cold parking lot for 11 minutes, and then just walking away. He didn't know the rest of the story when he mentioned it to a journalist friend over dinner one evening, and when the rest of it came out over the course of that conversation, the journalist sat very still for a moment, and then asked if he could make some calls. The piece that ran was not long and it was not loud. It was a local publication, a modest story, straightforward and factual, but it traveled in the way that certain stories travel, passed from one person to another not because an algorithm pushed it, but because people read it and felt something and wanted someone else to feel it too. It got shared by people who never share things. It got read in break rooms and sent in text messages and printed out by at least 3 people that anyone knew of, which in the current era means something. What caught people was not the powerful men on the lawn, though that image stayed with them. It was not even the things that changed for Maria afterward, though those things mattered. What caught people, what made them stop scrolling and actually read to the end, was the simplest part of the whole story, which was a tired woman in a gas station parking lot who saw something wrong and did not look for a reason to keep walking. Maria gave one interview, and one only, to the same journalist who had written the original piece, and she was composed throughout it in the careful way of someone who is not entirely comfortable being looked at. She answered every question directly and without exaggerating anything, and at the very end, when he asked her what had been going through her mind in the moment she crossed that parking lot toward a stranger who might already have been beyond saving, she was quiet for just a second, not performing the pause, just actually thinking, and then she said she hadn't really been thinking anything, that she had just seen a person who needed help, and her feet had moved before her brain got involved, and that she didn't think that made her special. She thought that was just what people were supposed to do for each other. The interview ran, the story spread further, and on the morning after it did, Maria got up before the sun, made coffee, got the twins moving, checked her bag, and drove to the hospital for her first full shift as a registered nurse. The same hospital, the same parking lot, the same drive she had made hundreds of times before. Nothing about the outside of her life looked dramatically different to anyone watching, but she walks through those hospital doors carrying something she hadn't carried in a long time, maybe ever. The quiet, unshakable knowledge that she had not bent under the weight of her life, that she had kept going when keeping going was hard, and that on one cold night when it mattered most, she had been exactly the person she had always hoped she was.
Thanks for watching my video. Like, subscribe and share.